All right, welcome to week 12. This week we're looking at chapter 10 on the presidency. The institution of the presidency reflected the framers' belief that one of the chief defects of the Articles of Confederation was the lack of an executive, but they also recognized that an unconstrained executive would pose a serious threat of tyranny. Constitutional delegate Edmund Randolph feared that a unified executive would be the fetus of monarchy, and for that reason was one of the three of the delegates that stayed that refused to sign the Constitution. He preferred kind of an executive council. One thing that's really clear when you read about the history of the presidency is that the framers did not view executive power the way we do. They clearly believed that Congress would be the focal point of the governing process and that the president's role would largely be passive and administrative in nature. What caused the change? When did the presidency begin to take on more and more authority? Certainly crises have tended to expand presidential power, and frequently presidential expansions have set precedents that have enabled future presidents to claim more authority. So which presidents have tended to be what we might call expansionists? And which presidents have tended to see their power and influence diminish over time? How would you characterize the last three presidents that we've had? Trump, our current president, Obama, and George W. Bush. Presidents have both delegated and implied powers. What's the difference between the two? What's an example of a delegated power or an implied power? One of the president's delegated powers is that that's become increasingly high profile is the president's pardoning power. Presidents have a fairly unconditional power to pardon people for any kind of wrongdoing. Why did the framers grant the president that particular constitutional authority? One of the reasons why this has become such a heavily discussed issue is that Trump has, he's being investigated for a variety of things. Certainly, since the Mueller probe, I mean, again, you now have this telephone call to the Ukraine. Several members of the Trump campaign or the administration have been, indicted and are being tried. In several instances, they have pled guilty and are serving jail sentences. This raises a constitutional question of whether Trump can, pardon his way out of his troubles. What are some of the limits to the president's pardoning power? Another issue that's been raised of late is, Trump's cabinet team and the number of scandals that have kind of surrounded many of them. What's the broader purpose of the president's council? What has gotten so many of Trump's team in trouble? He's sort of had unprecedented turnover in that regard. This was a president who, promised to drain the swamp. Why are so many of his cabinet members looking so swampy? One member of the original Trump team with Oklahoma ties was EPA Director Scott Pruitt, former Oklahoma State Senator and Oklahoma's Attorney General from 2011 to 2016. How did Pruitt, who sued the EPA 14 times, get named to be director of the EPA? What kinds of problems did he run into? How would you evaluate Pruitt's overall performance as EPA director? One other issue is, that's important for understanding the institution of the executive branch is the vice president. Why was the vice presidency created? What constitutional authority, what specific constitutional authority does the vice president have? How does the role of the vice president, how has it changed over time? Vice presidents can be particularly important in what we call balancing the ticket, right? The text discusses Joe Biden's role on the Democratic ticket in 2008 as providing a relatively inexperienced, certainly at the national level, Barack Obama, with foreign policy experience. In what way does Mike Pence, Trump's vice president, how does he balance the ticket? Is he going to be replaced in 2020? I guess we'll find out. One of the president's most important informal powers is the ability to do what we call going public, right? You can go public. What does it mean to go public? In practical terms, it means the president has the bully pulpit, to use Theodore Roosevelt's term. And he alone or she alone among American politicians has the power to command a national stage. When the president speaks, most people listen. And it certainly is a newsworthy event when the president speaks, particularly this one. As President Donald Trump has gone a lot further than most presidents, he uses Twitter in an unprecedented way in an attempt to circumvent the media and reach out directly to his base voters. In my view, one important way to interpret the recent events involving whether or not Trump lied when he denied that he repaid his personal attorney Michael Cohen for making a $130 payment to a porn star, Stormy Daniels, is that Trump and Rudy Giuliani and people around him believe that Trump's biggest threat to his presidency isn't impeachment, and it isn't ultimately legal because they believe that Robert Mueller won't directly, as it turns out, he didn't directly indict them. So rather than making a legal argument, they're making public relations arguments to firm up Trump's support among Republican voters. This deal with Ukraine creates a real problem for him to the extent that it's easy to understand what is being alleged, and it's really hard for his supporters to explain this sort of thing away. And I guess we're going to find out what happens with this one, but it looks like this one may have legs. The last thing I'd like to briefly address is the growing sense of gridlock gripping American politics and the impact that has on presidential power. Barack Obama, when confronted with a Congress unwilling to act on his agenda, observed that while he didn't have congressional support, he had a phone and a pen. What did he mean by that? In the text, the authors note that even in periods of gridlock, presidents can continue to act through administrative means, particularly through the aggressive use of signing statements and executive orders. In short, it means that even when divided government grinds the legislative process to a halt, presidents have the capacity to continue to act. In some ways, that is entirely desirable and in keeping with the role and vision of the presidency by the framers. They expected that the president might need to act swiftly in times of national emergency. However, gridlock can create tremendous incentives for presidents to act without even consulting Congress, and that raises again the possibility of constitutional crises erupting because of those kinds of the kind of mutual disrespect. And particularly with this president, this has really kind of reached kind of deeply problematical levels. Okay, I hope I've given you plenty to think about, and there's a lot more in this chapter that we can talk about. What parts of this chapter did you think were particularly important? Which parts were difficult to understand? Again, when you have trouble understanding something, let's bring it to the forum and talk about it. And hopefully I can clear it up. All right, let's have a great week.